Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Left Lens. This is Danny Dhaiphong. I'm joined today with a very special guest. I'm so glad we were able to make it work. We're both very busy. I know Dr. Jill Stein, who's joining me, is a very busy person. So really appreciate having you on, Dr. Stein. You are the former Green Party candidate, 2016. You ran with Aju Baraka as your vice president. And so thanks so much for coming today. Appreciate having you on.
My honor. No, I really appreciate your work, and it's really great to be here to talk, especially at a time like this.
Especially at a time like this. There's so much to talk about. As you're coming in, everyone, making sure you're liking this video, sharing it. If you're new here, subscribe to this channel. And of course, you can support this work either on Patreon, become a member. That link is in the description. You can also become a member here on YouTube or leave a tip on Rockfin at The Left Lens. But let's get right to it. Dr. Stein, I want to talk to you first about something that's happened just in the last few days. You had the Congressional Progressive Caucus, an oxymoron, but the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they wrote a letter that was released that was directed toward Joe Biden, urging diplomacy on the one hand, while also claiming full support for everything that's been done by the United States in this Ukraine crisis, this proxy war against Russia. The Congressional Progressive Caucus received extreme backlash for this letter. Joe Biden, the entire corporate media attacked the basis for this letter, said it was giving everything to Putin, and how could they? This is what, the Ukrainian self-determination point, all of that was being used. And immediately, a day later, so this was just Monday, 2 days ago, now Tuesday, the Congressional Progressive Caucus with Pramila Jayapal, who leads it, saying that they apologized for this. It wasn't the right time for the letter. They threw the staff under the bus. And it's quite an embarrassing moment. I wanted to know your thoughts about this, given all that you have done in terms of running on a third-party ticket, and also given everything that's happened with the United States and its role in fomenting and escalating this crisis going on in Ukraine and the region.
Yeah, sorry, my dog is really upset at even the mention of this subject. Yeah, I mean, it's really sad. It's pathetic. It's embarrassing that the so-called Congressional Progressive Caucus took 6-7 months to even mention diplomacy as this war escalates to the verge of nuclear confrontation. Every day, virtually something more dangerous is happening. Really, any observer that has, awake functioning brain cells is commenting how, what a terrifying moment this is. The nuclear clock is at 90 seconds to midnight. Everyone from Kissinger, to John Mersheimer, sort of the full political spectrum, to Chomsky, are saying this is an incredibly dangerous moment. And this is a time for the test of leadership. And unfortunately, leadership is completely failing us, is really throwing us under the bus. It is impoverishing us at home, and it is endangering us abroad. There's incredible miseducation that's going on right now about the nature of nuclear war. There's a pretense being made that it would be survivable. It's like the most incredibly clueless morons are leading this charge into just blind militarism right now. It's kind of the logical conclusion of where our bipartisan foreign policy establishment has been going for decades, and we could talk more about that. But, in a nutshell, this is how much room the bipartisan establishment leaves for discussion and dialogue. We're not only barreling headlong into a potential nuclear crisis, but doing so without a word of debate, without a word of discussion, while the American public is very clear that they are not buying this. A recent poll that was done by the Quincy Institute, the statecraft so-called nonprofit institute for something or other, statecraft, just did this poll that showed close to 60% of Americans are now saying they want a diplomatic solution ASAP, even if that means compromising with Russia. I mean, this is what anyone who understands diplomacy and understands leadership and who has a sense of foreign policy that goes beyond just pure jingoism and nativism. It's like that's how low our bipartisan structure has descended. It's really a pathetic and shameful moment. And it really clarifies, again, that our most progressive of the two parties is useless to meet this moment. They really are impoverishing us. They are endangering us. And I just want to connect the dots between this war that we are being forced into and the economic crisis that is going off the charts right now. And the fact that the war disrupted, energy supplies and energy flow, but not just the war, also US sanctions have created an incredible crisis in energy, particularly in Europe. So where is US energy going to go? It's going to go where the biggest dollar drives it. And, energy prices are way up, especially at the pump, but they are also for fuel. And we are going to be feeling that big time. People in Europe are going to be facing real risks of actually freezing this winter, not the least of which is Ukraine. I mean, this is just a global disaster that is being fought recklessly to the last Ukrainian. It's not just for the benefit of the US or Europeans or whoever, or future generations, that this needs to be stopped. It's also for the Ukrainians who've been sort of led around by the nose here and goaded into this horrific war, for which the groundwork has been laid for so many years. For people who think the war just started in February, it's like, well, time to do your homework here, because that was just really phase 2, or maybe it's phase 10 of this war, depending how far back you go. But certainly starting with the Maidan coup in 2014, there has been war conducted on the people of the Donbass, of the most eastern provinces in Ukraine, and there have been many thousands of deaths there. I think it's something on the order of 15,000, if I'm remembering correctly, which to the latest figures I've seen, even now exceeds the horrific deaths that have taken place in the western part of Ukraine. So everybody is losing right now. Everybody is losing, and our fearless leaders are leading the charge against our expressed wishes. So to me, this just so underscores how we have been politically abandoned and betrayed and preyed upon by the two leading parties of war and Wall Street. This is not a survivable future, not in the near term, not in the long term. And it's important to remember that we have the numbers here, as well as the facts, and the higher values, that is peace and justice, that are really on our side here. By us, I mean people who recognize the imperative for peace and the imperative for negotiations over just brute exercise of force and tossing the dice that hopefully something terrible doesn't happen. People should not feel like this is a war taking place in Ukraine and Russia, because in this day and age where there are missiles, some that are far faster than US missiles and U.S. missile defense, if you even believe the mythology that missile defense would protect us, we are not in the clear here. And if we are pushing this war to the limits, we can very well be dragged into it. And people should not for a minute think that you can, duck under your desk like they tried to teach us in the 1950s. That doesn't work. It doesn't work to stay in your homes, which is what government websites are telling you now. Be sure to get inside.
New York City did that. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, and it's up now on a U.S. government website as well. There is no escaping this, and being on the other side of the ocean also doesn't escape this. Remember that Russia has very fast missiles right now, and far faster than anything we can defend against. If for your own self-preservation alone, you need to stop and take stock of exactly what is going on here. We should not be putting ourselves, our families, our children, the Ukrainians, Europeans, everyone else into the target hairs right now. This is an utter exercise in foolishness, stupidity, and misleadership that should be rejected now.
Yeah, and you brought it up earlier, and we can tie it into what's happened for you, your experience, because there in these attacks upon you, because I mean, if there's one thing that just exposes how fraudulent these quote unquote progressive Democrats are, is that they don't defend people. You have even like Ro Khanna says he's all about independent media and all about third parties and democracy, yet no one was defending you when you were being attacked. And now they don't even defend themselves when they are told to basically shut up, when they just a little bit ask for diplomacy. And they didn't even ask for diplomacy and a ceasing of hostilities. They said maybe eventually a ceasefire at some point if you talk. They didn't even ask for maybe you should maybe the U.S. should stop providing these weapons to Ukraine. Maybe NATO should stop fueling this deadly conflict that is only going to get deadlier, as you said, the more that it escalates. So they didn't even ask for that. They said everything that the United States is doing and NATO is doing is correct. Right? That's what they said. But, this is having some impacts that aren't so great. They're really talking about the midterms, it sounds like. So maybe you should try diplomacy because they didn't say this, but it feels like the economic situation is pretty bad right now, and it's only going to get worse. So perhaps you should try diplomacy, even just for saving face. And Biden and company, the entire political establishment said absolutely not. And the progressive, quote unquote, Democrats completely folded without even a challenge. I mean, they threw their staff under the bus. That's how bad it was. Anyway, before I want to pull up and talk about what's happened to you, but I don't know if you have any further reaction to that, because that's really what struck me about this whole situation.
I think you're absolutely right. This is the incredibly embarrassing and humiliating events of the last 36 hours with the Congressional Progressive Caucus. It's like a microcosm of what is broken with the Democratic Party in particular, but it's not just the Democratic Party. I mean, it's the whole political system and the way that it has been hijacked by big money, by oligarchy. We really have a plutocracy now. It's not a democracy. It's a plutocracy and an autocracy. The system is really kind of in its ultimate stages of breakdown. It's sort of like end stage empire, end stage capitalism. This steady decline has been taking place for as long as I've been a political observer, like the past 30 years. One stage was pretty predictable from the last, and it's not just happening by itself. It's really a symbol of broader political decay and the rightward shift of both major political parties. They are both moving to the right. So yes, it's true. It would be terrible if Republicans win and then, further hijack and dismantle our elections. But they've already really been hijacked from inside. And we can talk about that more later. But the role that money of the super rich is playing in our elections in this midterm is completely off the charts. And if you wonder why is it that the Democratic Party can no longer take an absolutely no-brainer position to advocate for simple diplomacy in this war, it has everything to do with this continued rightward shift of both political parties to where, they are just completely in the service of the war machine and Wall Street and fossil fuel companies. And all of them are really benefiting from this war. Yeah. In the same way that inflation has gone off the charts, 60% of people now are just barely getting by paycheck to paycheck. Profits for fossil fuel companies have doubled to tripled. And same for the war profiteers. They are rolling in dough. They're having a great time. When the Afghanistan war resolved or, sort of just ground to a halt out of sheer exhaustion after 20 years, when Afghanistan was over, we were supposed to have like a $300 million a day, payday. That's what was going into Afghanistan. Well, guess how much is now going into Ukraine? $250 million a day. That's according to Stephen Semler and the excellent work that he does on his website. So this has long been in the cards that the military-industrial complex is really driving our foreign policy. Afghanistan went away. We needed a new source of revenue. It's more complicated than that, but that is a major driver, and you can't close your eyes to the elephant in the room. There are a couple of elephants, but that's one of the big ones. And that elephant is stomping us, crushing us to death. And we have to put a stop to it.
Yeah. Well, those are all great points. Those are points that are not talked about too often. And now I want to get to something, because I think we will, of course, definitely speak to the larger geopolitical, environmental, economic costs of what's going on globally, the U.S.'s imperial role globally. But I want to get to what's been happening to you, because you have been the subject of a malicious attack from, I would say, you can correct me if I'm wrong, mainly Democratic Party neocon elements and their corporate media allies, smearing you as, and this has been, of course, since the whole Russiagate fiasco conspiracy theory emerged, smearing you as a kind of like a Putin's puppet, right? So I want to pull up the slide because you have a series of slides that you want to show us. I'm just going to add them now to the stream. You have been a target of McCarthyism, and even today, it's been 6 years plus since you ran with the Green Party, for president during the Hillary Clinton loss to Donald Trump. And even today, you, Susan Sarandon, you all get kind of lumped into this. You spoiled it. You're the reason for Donald Trump, and you did it because you're aligned with Vladimir Putin in Russia, and you work directly with them. And this is something that people seriously talk about all over social media, and it's obviously had a lot of consequences for you. I just want to leave you the floor to go where you want to go with what's been going on in this regard.
Thank you. I love talking about this because it is such a poster child of McCarthyite propaganda for the new Cold War. And, I feel kind of like it's a badge of honor that all these Democratic Party attack dogs are paying so much attention to me. It makes me feel like I must have some tremendous, power or influence or whatever it is that they want to attribute to me. But I think it's really worth digging in to see what was going on here, because it's quite instructive, and I'm not the only one. So, Tulsi Gabbard is also smeared for being a peace advocate and called a Russian asset. Bernie Sanders, Susan Sarandon, as you mentioned, so I feel like, wow, I'm in pretty cool company. But, it really has been extensive, and it's not just been a matter of smears, but, I've been subject to a 3-year investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee, which cost our campaign hundreds of thousands of dollars to have our legal defense. The recount that I was involved in was also subject to this investigation. Ralph Nader had 20 lawsuits thrown up against him when he was running for office in 2004. And, it's an age-old strategy for how the power structure tries to hobble its critics. So, yeah, I've been kind of hobbled dealing with this, especially the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation that just required a lot of digging into old information, had to turn over lots of stuff, and do an interview with their staff, and relive every little detail of what went on. And this is 3 years after the fact. I had to go back through all my records, and it was a very long, arduous process, and it does tie you up. I'm now fighting the Federal Election Commission, who's come after me 6 years after the fact, demanding that I repay a major portion of the public matching funds that we earned to get on the ballot, and which were earned for that purpose. They're coming after me for $175,000 personally to repay matching funds because of some ridiculous rules that are different if you are a grassroots independent party, alternative party candidate. You don't qualify in the same way that you would if you were a major party candidate, when you would have a big fundraising machine and you don't need the money. You don't need the public funding. Public funding should make our elections more competitive and should allow voters greater breadth of choice, which is what voters are demanding now. So at any rate, this is ongoing. It's the legal and administrative part that is really very, very time consuming. I don't pay a lot of attention to the smear campaigns on social media now. Once in a while, I hear about them or I encounter them, but it's always the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it's mostly bots and trolls. There was a recent article by Ben Norton about 2 academic institutions, one in Australia, the other, I think, in California. Really great article that was published on his site, Multipolarista or something like that. Maybe we'll put up the link for it afterwards. A great article that actually, for once, they analyzed the social media trends on behalf of, the warmongers, rather than attributed to Russian trolls. They actually looked at, well, what about the West? And they found, in fact, most of the social media related to Ukraine is actually coming from trolls and bots that are part of the West. They're not Russian. They're U.S. and NATO, who knows, whatever. But they are on the pro-war side. So I wouldn't be at all surprised, because the stuff that comes after me on social media, it's all the same. It's as if it's one person kind of resending the same stupid tweet, which is mostly that picture on the left or something related to that.
Yeah, let's talk about sort of because I know you had some slides you wanted to show. Let's talk about this. So this is I remember this this was like a ceremony that you attended in Russia, correct?
In
And
Moscow.
yes, in Moscow. And this has been one of the talking points of you. I believe was it hosted by RT?
This was a media conference, a global media conference hosted by RT that I was invited to, along with a whole slew of progressive and peace advocates, including Jesse Ventura, Rocky Anderson, the former mayor of Salt Lake City, historians, Lee Camp, just a whole slew of people were there. Because I was a political person, I got seated with the politicos. The guy to my left, I thought was a bodyguard because he and Putin walked in, and the guy further to the left, whose name I can't quite read, and one other, three of these strapping guys that turned out to be like Putin's core group walked in with him. He wasn't there for very long. Maybe he was at the table for 10 minutes, something like that. And then he gave a speech in Russian, but not a word was uttered in English from them. And the guy to my right, Willie Wimmer, who was the advisor to Helmut Kohl. So he was like the global international advisor to Helmut Kohl, who was like for 20 or 30 years, he was the leader of Germany. He was the prime minister of Germany when Germany was reuniting and when the Cold War was coming to an end. So Willie Wimmer was the only guy I talked to that night, and the only person within earshot who spoke English. And it was very interesting talking with him, but there was no conversation. Even Michael Flynn, who's across the table from me, in my little introductory conversation with him, I gave him my elevator speech about why I was there, which was to basically share our campaign agenda to abolish nuclear weapons, for a peace offensive in the Middle East, and for a global Green New Deal. And in fact, the main reason that I was at this conference, this was just the dinner at the end of the conference. The big thing was the conference, where I had maybe 10 minutes to give remarks, which was essentially about that. And it was all stuff that's been, what shall we say, totally validated by history, that we really do need to get rid of nuclear weapons, and we really need a global Green New Deal. And that, I was calling for a cessation of hostilities in Syria as part of this peace offensive in the Middle East. We need that, we need peace on all fronts, and we need to redirect those resources into addressing our real common threat, which is the nuclear. Well, it's nuclear, but and it's the climate crisis. And that's what we really need to be about. And that's the reason that I was there when I gave Michael Flynn the elevator speech for that. And I had no idea who he was. It was very clear we had nothing in common, and we had no reason to talk to each other further. So maybe our conversation lasted 30 seconds, and that was it. And when Putin walked in with these guys, you had no idea who they were. There were no introductions that were made at the table. There was no translator. People who spoke English talked to the person near them who spoke the same language. That was it, okay? So that was that. That picture was taken in December of 2015, and we were very public about that. We were also very public about having to raise money to go, because while I was offered transportation and room and board, I did not accept it. That would be illegal to do as a political candidate. So we raised money, and we were very public about raising money, what our message was, why we were going. This was all on our website, in our emails, our social media. Okay, so this picture gets snapped, but the picture doesn't come out until when? When does this picture start circulating on social media? On the day that I received the Green Party nomination. Democratic Party operatives start circulating this picture and declaring that I am a Russian asset, and that I'm in collaboration with Putin. And that has continued to this day. And then the report from what's his name, the Steele dossier comes out years later, and it is now formally accusing me of having been funded by Putin and being an asset. It doesn't say how, but it says that I was one of the sought assets and that that effort was successful. Now, it later emerged that the Steele dossier was bullshit, you know, that it was just based on rumor and innuendo. There was no factual basis to the Steele dossier whatsoever. But for the entire time that the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation was going on, and they issued 5 different reports, I wasn't addressed until the 5th report, which was like 3 years in. And at that point, the Senate Intelligence Committee, they thanked me for my cooperation. They thanked me very much. And they said that, you know, that there was nothing there, that there was nothing untoward or improper in what I did, that there was no evidence of any problem. But the public had been basically miseducated for 3 years into thinking that I was a Russian asset. And by the way, who sponsored the Steele dossier? That was the DNC.
DNC, yep.
So, I mean, this all, you know, this all kind of conveniently emerges as part of the Democratic Party attack on its political competitors. So this is both warmongering on the part of the Democrats, and not just the Democrats, because the Senate Intelligence Committee was bipartisan. It was also Republicans. It's warmongering, laying the groundwork for paranoia about Russia, but it was also suppressing political competitors. And by competitors, I mean, you know, grassroots politics, politics that's not corporate, people-powered politics. This is about continuing to smear and to denigrate challengers like me or Bernie Sanders, so that we don't someday, you know, come back again when things are getting shakier, because the empire is really on its last legs. It's undergoing, you know, just tumultuous stuff right now, economically, as well as militarily. Jeffrey Sachs does a great job of talking about what's going on here with regard to human resources and financial resources. The GDP of the G7 has now been surpassed by the GDP of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and who knows, maybe Turkey soon as well. So, you know, the times they are changing, and the U.S. declared foreign policy of basically, what is it called? This global domination. It doesn't work so well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, I want to segue to the next slide, because I think it really does demonstrate what is behind the, not just the smear campaign, but this was an active campaign of repression against you that, you, as you said, fits into this larger campaign of warmongering and repression, both against alternative third-party candidacies, political formations, and really anybody who challenges the duopoly in any nation, of course, because that's really why Russia is under the crossfire of the United States. It's not because Russia is an autocracy or authoritarian. It's because Russia is asserting sovereignty, and that is a problem. And so I wanted to bring up your slides again, because here's a story that you wanted to highlight. Could you talk about this, because it has to do with exactly what we were talking about before, the utter hypocrisy of labeling and smearing and attacking you for being a so-called Russian asset. Meanwhile, there are deliberate attempts to undermine U.S. elections through this campaign internally. This has happened. The United States government is doing this. So could you talk about this more?
Yes, you couldn't make this up. This is like hysterical. So I'm accused of being a Russian asset. I'm being investigated by the Senate Intelligence Committee. And, that includes for having been at a conference in Moscow to promote nuclear disarmament and peace and global climate action. So I'm being like really castigated for that. But then also I'm then accused of being the beneficiary of Russian social media that benefited my campaign in order to hurt Hillary Clinton. And the evidence that they provide for this is absolutely laughable. And if you haven't read it yet, do look at Aaron Mate's analysis, which is really wonderful. But in the course of like trying to, to smear me as a Russian asset benefiting from Russian social media, the Senate Intelligence Committee hires this cybersecurity organization linked to the security state. So these are like guys that were formerly doing this in, I don't know, CIA or the FBI or the Army, I don't know, but tied, with US government experience. But now they're going to cash in on their experience. So they create this corporation that does analysis, and they produce this report. They're called New Knowledge. Now you don't hear about them anymore because they had to disband right away after they produced this report. Why is that? Well, this report, let me just say first, alleges that Russians are doing this super effective, high-tech media election interference. And it also, and it says that I'm benefiting from that. And so they lay out this report. Shortly after the report, that's trying to incriminate me and Russian social media. After they lay out this report, guess what emerges? What emerges is the finding that the New Knowledge firm were themselves impersonating a Russian interference operation for the benefit of Democrats in the Alabama Senate election in 2017. There was a special election. And there's a complicated scenario, but basically they tried to pin the Republican as being a beneficiary. So they created all these social media bots that swarmed him to support him. And then they were publicly pointing out that, look, this guy is supported by Russia. So so therefore you better vote for the Democrat. They basically impersonated a Russian social media campaign, doing the very thing that they are saying, I think, inventing, that supposedly took place in 2016 that was benefiting me and hurting Hillary Clinton. And yeah, I mean, it's like, this is just like the poster child of utter hysterical hypocrisy on the part of the Democrats and their whole Russiagate enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what WikiLeaks revealed during, I think it was the Vault 7 dump, that the U.S. intelligence apparatus had the capacity to essentially, through some kind of malware, right, like steal the and mimic the capacities of foreign countries' tactics and strategies around hacking, and basically mimic them for their own purposes. So that was WikiLeaks finding that out, and then you have just basically shown, and the New York Times admits to this in 2018, that this happened, that this was happening, and that there was a corporation, a private contractor, engaging in this activity to undermine a U.S. election. I mean that's incredible.
And paid by a Democratic donor in order to tip the election, doing everything that they are very busy, accusing me of.
Right, exactly, and Let's go to now, because I think this is important. You are very vocal about the state of U.S. elections. I mean, you ran for the Green Party ticket, and you've been an activist for many years. And one of the things you're very vocal about is the corporate control, the corporate influence in U.S. politics. And this is now not a secret. It's talked about even by so-called progressive Democrats like Bernie Sanders. But it seems like there is, how should I say, almost like there's an acknowledgement of it, but not much being done about it. And this is all a distraction from it, right? Because it's easier to blame Russia than it is to blame the monopolies, the cartels, and the banks that are actually buying and influencing and controlling the politicians that are elected, but really selected by these interests. So I want to go to that slide because I know you wanted to talk about what's going on in these races now, because we're in midterms now. And this is an important midterm election season for the Democrats. They've been predicted to lose by many mainstream polls and mainstream corporate media outlets, predicted to lose this congressional election. And as you said before, this is an important moment in the world. You have a monumental crisis in Ukraine. You have a geopolitical crisis where you have Russia and China becoming more and more targeted by the United States. And then you have this worldwide economic crisis, and you have a Biden administration, which isn't so popular right now. So it's a really important moment. And I think this might be a good reminder to talk to our audiences about what's going on politically and how corporations and the rich are really the problem here. So do you want to go into what's happening in these Senate races in particular? It seems like you've been digging up some data.
Yeah, it's really pretty jaw-dropping. And I'll just preface this by saying, we are a plutocracy, really not a democracy. The Democratic Party gives a lot of lip service to voting rights and voter suppression, and that is a very important issue. It's a critical issue, but it's not the only one. And at the same time that people of color, youth, elders, and so on are being denied the vote, voters across the board are being denied choice, because we're only allowed two choices in our elections. Very hard for third parties to even get on the ballot or to be covered by the media. And candidates are selected within any party as well as across parties by the money primary. And the money primary is bigger than ever. The total spending in 2016 was something like $7 billion. And that was in all the elections in 2016. Well, in 2020, it doubled. It was like $14 billion. And not only are we like drowning in money, but the amount of money that's contributed by any one donor is also going off the charts. And that's happening with super PACs and also with dark money that comes in through super PACs. But suffice it to say, money is concentrating into fewer and fewer hands. So, we have extraordinarily rich billionaires and more billionaires, but we also have way, way more people now in extreme poverty. That's true globally, and it's true in the US. Billionaires increased their wealth over the last 2 years by, some 60% or more, at the same time that at least 8 million more people went into poverty. So money's going into fewer hands. Those fewer hands have more of it, and they now can buy out elections. And what they do now through super PACs and the amount of money coming in through super PACs, that is money that has no constraints on it. There are no limits to the amount of money that a billionaire can donate now. And so this huge amount of money is coming in, and it gets targeted at swing races, critical races. So they don't have to buy out all the races. They just have to buy out the ones that could go in either direction. And that's all they need to do. So you can be sure the Democrats are, most of this money right now is coming in through Republicans, but in 2020, it mostly came in for Democrats, so it's like an evil system that corrupts both parties. But here you can see, if you look at the total spending, for example, in the Pennsylvania Senate race, that's John Fetterman. It's what, 296 million total. Look at the candidate amount. It's 119 million. The total coming in from outside, which is mostly coming through PACs, is 176 million. So you see the amount coming in through a few donors, 176 million, way outspends the amount coming in from ordinary mortals, who are contributing anywhere up to, I think the limit is now like $2,900. And that's no small potatoes either. And if you look at how that money divides up, it's mostly coming in through big donors. There's a lot of lip service given to small donors and how powerful they are. Well, that's true in a handful of campaigns that are largely funded by small donors. But if you look all over, small donors in 2020 accounted for approximately 20% of donations. So that's 80% that's coming from very deep pockets.
Right.
So it's deep.
Here you have it here, small donors, 2020, just 22%. Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Yep.
Wow.
And Republicans are winning the big money race right now, but the Democrats were winning it in 2020, which explains why the Democrats keep lurching to the right, because funding is increasingly coming from fewer big donors who then have huge sway in the party. So that's why the Democratic Party cannot muster a few words on behalf of peace and diplomacy right now, because they've moved too far to the right for it. So this isn't just like a thing of the moment. This is a very well-established trend that's been going on for decades. Our political parties have really been bought into complete corruption. And yeah, it's awful that the Republicans are highly likely to dominate both chambers of the House, of Congress. But even within the Democratic Party, it's already in service of billionaires, bankers, big oil, the usual suspects. So the system is being bought out from under us. It's really important not to get talked down into window dressing solutions. We really need, we need a reboot. We need a reboot. You can't have a revolution in a counter-revolutionary party. That's not to say you have to be one party or another, but parties that are controlled by big money ain't coming back. They've only been going deeper over the edge. And, we're in the 11th hour, whether you're looking at the climate collapse, whether you're looking at nuclear weapons, whether you're looking at really the exhaustion of the economy. We're in end stage capitalism, end stage empire. It doesn't look good here, except that everyday people are saying, God damn it, I've had enough. And if you look at polls, if you look at movements in the street, if you look at the pink tide in South America right now, things are going very strong for people-powered resistance. And we need to do that here as well. I mean, we are doing it. Look at the resurgence of the labor movement, for example, the student rebellion, the student debt, the success of the student debt movement, which has now basically been put on hold because the solution Biden worked out wasn't quite so, resilient. But the movements are really driving things right now. And we, we should not be talked out of our power. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have it, and we need it more than ever. And it's really important that we organize to use it.
Yeah, I mean, those are all very good points. And I think a very positive message, because we have a little bit of an echo coming through. I don't know if that's going to, okay. Yeah, it stops and then starts. So yeah, that message, right? It can be very easy to become nihilistic, to become pessimistic, when the options you just outlined, this big corporate money, capitalist money, capitalist control over the options that have been forced down our throats as the only options politically, this duopoly. It can be very easy in that environment, and it definitely happened during the 2016 and 2020 elections, where you had these quote unquote progressive Democrats, right? They were waging these campaigns that were trapped within the Democratic Party and were brutally crushed. And a lot of the followers, right, that came out of that, a lot of the supporters of those who are more sympathetic to socialism, those who maybe were in Occupy Wall Street in the past and then became absorbed into the Bernie Sanders campaign. A lot of people who want Medicare for all, I mean, these are now majority positions. This is, most people in the United States want Medicare for all. They want student debt cancellation or for some form of forgiveness, a lot more forgiveness than what Joe Biden has decided to provide. People want the climate change situation to be addressed in a whole way. Green New Deal is very, very, very popular. And people are very tired of war. So I think that it can be very easy to become pessimistic when the Democratic Party, especially because the Democratic Party targets those who are leaning left, those who are thinking about alternatives, those who are challenging the establishment. But really, when it's just the scary GOP and then the Democratic Party as the default, it can be easy to become pessimistic. So I think it's a good message to understand that this the only way change comes is through real grassroots, as you said, people-powered resistance that confronts the powerful. And right now, despite how bleak it may look electorally, there's a lot of pressure being put just in, I mean, let's just take the Ukraine situation. Well, whatever people want to say about the those who interrupted AOC, those who brought up the Ukraine issue, whatever their personal politics and their political expression is, it still stands to reason that because something like that went public and went viral, and because of just the situation in Ukraine, because of world public opinion, and even U.S. domestic opinion, how there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of opposition to the economic fallout from this. So even then, they had to respond, right? There was a response. And there's going to be more and more conversations about where this goes, because there's news reports today saying that actually the United States and Russia are talking, because there's a lot of what they're calling misunderstandings about the situation because of the nuclear buildup. There is more conversation about it. It's mainly the U.S. making all kinds of propaganda and then saying Russia is going to do something, Russia's going to do something, and then you have all these mysterious incidents like the Crimea Bridge and like the Nord Stream attack and all of that. But nonetheless, there's communication. There is pressure being placed. And the United States, as you said, is in decline. It is in decay. This empire is in decay. And so there is this, I think, legitimate pressure. We can push more. And I think that means we have an opportunity to push more. And we have to be careful, I think, in this moment, because the midterm elections, just like most election seasons, suck a lot of energy and tend to divert a lot of it back into Democratic Party politics. It feels stale right now. I don't know what your reaction to the midterms is right now, but that's how it feels from where I look at it. It feels very stale, and that could be a very good thing.
Yeah, I had kind of, I had a sort of a little revelation today thinking about the midterms, because having this conversation with you forced me to sort of look systematically at it, which kind of turns my stomach. And, it just dawned on me that the way I feel like this, the way I feel about midterms, it's kind of like political pornography. It's porn, it's political porn, and it tries to suck you in, but it's really, it's not really meaningful. It tries to grab you with these little, edge of your seat kind of stories about who's going to come out better in the debate, who's going to turn up, will the abortion issue still resonate with Democratic voters. Oh, they missed the timing on it. I mean, this nauseating obsession with the minutia of the horse race is just really, it's just really pathetic. And, you know, it's like going to gamble on a horse race, or, you know, or it's like pornography. And it's just, it doesn't really move us to a better place. And it just sort of like engages people with this titillating, superficial drama. And it studiously avoids the real issues. So like Nancy Pelosi, you know, is saying now that, oh, we just have to talk about all the great things we have done. So what are the great things they have done that she refers to? Well, we are going to fight for Roe v. Wade. And Joe Biden is saying, oh, please get us, you know, support our presence in Congress. And I promise you, first thing I am going to do in the new Congress is codify, you know, present legislation to codify Roe v. Wade. That's what he's been saying, you know, that's what he said throughout his campaign. That's what Obama said, you know, that's what Democratic voters have been promised forever. So that's one thing that they say you know, their claim to fame. Another one is, oh, we've really brought down healthcare costs. How have they brought down healthcare costs? She's referring to a provision in the Inflation Reduction Act that provides somewhere around $40 billion to maintain subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. Well, that's good, but it's not what was promised, and it's not what people need, because people are still, you know, choosing between their rent and their health care, and 87 million people have inadequate health insurance. Now, one out of every three COVID deaths was related to inadequate health insurance coverage. You know, and they've broken their promises about a public option over and over again. So the third thing that Nancy Pelosi is patting herself and Democrats on the back for is that we're lowering the price of prescription drugs. You know what she's referring to? She's referring to another provision in the Inflation Reduction Act that says in 2026, 4 years from now, 20 drugs, 20 out of thousands, will be allowed to undergo bulk purchasing negotiations to lower their price. This is like, what a joke. What a complete mockery of the Democratic Party and its pretensions to having done something. I mean, more than the money going into the elections is the fact that Democrats have not delivered. And I mean, Republicans haven't delivered either, but the Democrats are the people in charge right now. Nominally, they are in charge. They have the numbers. So they are going to be held accountable. But if this decides our vote, if this is the depth of our analysis and understanding of the election, we will never get beyond this two-party back and forth. Just throw the bums out who are the latest ones to have thrown you under the bus, and then throw the other guys out. It's also, you know, speaks volumes that this huge amount of money that's pouring in right now through super PACs, these unlimited contributions, they are mostly funding negative ads. So people are not even like voting for something. They're just voting against the corrupt, clueless idiots that they are most afraid of. This is like what our political system has become. It's kind of hopeless, but it's not hopeless once you reject that political system and understand that we have the power to create another one. It's not going to be easy, and it will be founded really and driven by social movements, which are always the engine of political change. So they both have to happen. It's not like, oh, you know, just drop what you're doing on student debt, or, you know, to stop evictions, or for healthcare. No, those are really critical. But don't allow your rebellion to stop at the doors of the voting booth. We have to revolt in the voting booth, and don't be talked out of your power.
Yeah. And when, you know, when I hear you talking, I mean, we talk about social movements. One of the things that's been so hard, and it's great that we've been able to talk about both the election situation in the United States, which tends to be what gets the most focus, because I mean, in part, it is an expression of everything, right? The way that the ruling elite, the ruling class, the way that they divert attention from actual issues, and then the way that they distort and misinform about a lot of issues to get us away from understanding the system as a whole. And then, yeah, we began this conversation about the international situation. You brought up global domination, and you've used the term full spectrum dominance. And one of the things that's so hard, I want to know your thoughts about this, is connecting these two things together. Because I feel like, I mean, we saw it in the Fetterman Dr. Oz debate. I mean, the election situation just gets more and more bizarre in the U.S. But they talked about China, and their comments about China were very just, I mean, disturbing, right? You had Fetterman going even to the right, trying to label his Republican counterpart as some kind of, a money maker in China. And, it was kind of like what Biden did during the 2020 election to Trump, where he was trying to be tougher on China than Donald Trump and associate Trump with Xi Jinping, authoritarianism. So, I mean, I think one of the weaker points for our social movements is understanding full spectrum dominance, U.S. imperialism. I think it's great. I mean, honestly, I think it's heroic to go on a trip to Russia, to Moscow, for the cause of peace, to talk to those we need to be talking to. I mean, Russian people, the Russian government, all need to be treated like equals in an international arena if we're to have true peace. Same goes for China. Same goes for any other country. So what do you have to say about this? What I feel like is a gap, because I feel like my channel, the work that I've done has been centered on, we need to exit the Democratic Party and figure out an alternative. And so I've supported your candidacy in 2016. And, I have supported third parties, and also just those who are trying to find their way. Maybe it's not elections. Maybe it's in the grassroots. Maybe it's in other parties, socialist parties.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about this gap in terms of foreign policy? I mean, this Ukraine situation is so, I mean, it's such a flashpoint, but then you also have Taiwan, you have U.S. aggression toward China, and then you also have the ongoing wars. The U.S. is still bombing at least 7 countries, military base 800 plus. I mean, this is a really serious situation that is both killing people, a lot of people, and really one of the big sparks for the extreme poverty that you spoke about. So what are your thoughts about this gap in our movements, to exit the Democratic Party?
Yeah. That's the $24,000 question. How do we, support people to dare to advocate for ourselves? And I feel like we are in this kind of historic moment right now, because it's becoming very hard to fool yourself into thinking that we have a future, or that our kids have a future. We've sort of entered this age of consequences on war, both, with inflation. I mean, inflation is being very much driven by war right now. The cost of the war budget, likewise on climate, people are getting hit really all over the place, whether it's, well, in particular, it's drought and the cost of food. And this is going to hit in a much bigger way soon. We're not sure exactly when, but the Colorado River is 75% depleted now, and it supplies the California agriculture system that provides half the fruits and vegetables for the country. Half. So all of that is at risk for going away or being severely compromised. So food prices are likely to really further skyrocket. They're already skyrocketing, largely because of fuel costs and transportation costs, but that's going to get worse. It's like all of the drivers of discontent are revving up right now as our as our political system mismanages and becomes more and more dysfunctional and becomes incapable of learning from real world experience and incapable of doing mid-course corrections, because it is not a human system right now. It is really a corporate dominated system that is driven by profit maximization. So it's not able to stand back and think, like Gorbachev and Kennedy did in the Cuban Missile Crisis. They could step back and think. But Joe Biden kind of gets his marching orders from who knows, actually, who, but there are not really thoughtful and rational voices in his administration right now. He's being advised by neocons, and former board members for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and it's like there's this revolving door, which is also part of our political corruption right now, the revolving door between corporations and our regulatory institutions. It's no wonder there's so much controversy around COVID and around government recommendations about how to protect public health, because people do not have confidence, and are thoroughly suspicious of our regulatory institutions because they are flooded with money. And if you want to have a rational public health policy and agreement around it, the first thing we have to do is shut the revolving door and get the money out of politics, and then we can begin to humanize our process and humanize our democracy. If it's not a human democracy, it's not a democracy. So, I think all of these, the crises converge, but the solutions also converge. And I think the bottom line is that we are in this end game right now for empire and capitalism. And people are forced of necessity to really rethink things. We're kind of having a big reboot right now, and it's not easy. And the leading edge of this is our younger generation. And polls say that they have thrown out our political establishment. 60% of young people, more than 60, it's like 60 to 70%, feel like they have been betrayed and abandoned and abused by both political parties, and they just don't accept them. There's like a 21% confidence level in our political institutions among young people, and it's not much better than that among older people. This is why the heavy hand of censorship and repression is so forceful right now, because they are kind of quaking in their boots. They're feeling extremely vulnerable. We got a lot of unhappy campers right now. And so if people begin to hear, oh, there are ways we can solve this, and there are just and equitable solutions, the problems go away, and people who've retreated into, fascism or proto-fascism, these were also people who were ready to support Bernie Sanders. Many of them, who went to Trump were previously Sanders supporters who just got burned and gave up. So, and this is always the setting of fascism, where people have been abandoned by a wealthy, powerful power structure. So it's not rocket science about how we fix this. What's rocket science really is how do we get together and how do we begin to organize in a way that leverages the power and the agreement and the community values that are alive and well in the grassroots and are happening. They're just blocked from participating in our political system. So, I think the first step is just demanding that we have a right to a democracy. We have a right to own this political system, period. And we have a right to throw the bums out.
Yeah. I mean, that should be what democracy is, right? I mean, that's what's so interesting about the United States. It boasts about democracy, the establishment, both parties say democracy, this, democracy, that. But really what they're talking about is democracy for them and democracy for the rich and democracy for their handlers and those that they serve. I mean, that's a democracy that they're talking about. And, you brought up the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is, I've talked about on this channel, we are in a moment now where we are in a new Cold War. And yes, when Khrushchev and Kennedy, like that's not happening right now. there isn't that same kind of robust, like when there is a crisis, that there's leadership willing to talk about it without you know, without the idea that everything has to be driven by the end game, right? And perhaps things will change as the crisis gets worse, because the crisis is inevitably getting worse. And when I hear things like, "Oh, there's phone calls happening now in secret," they're trying to keep them secret, but they're happening and it's getting out in public, into the public. It makes me think that there's some real hesitations about what's going on. But at the same time, the dangers are very real. The dangers of a global confrontation, the dangers of uh, this kind of like new iteration of fascism, right? It's not just Trump, but it's also all of the forces that are leading us, the whole of the United States, to the right. And the Democratic Party is right at the center of it, for no pun intended. The collapse of the center is really, in this context, the Democratic Party is doing. They're the ones who are forwarding corporate politics and imperialist politics that is targeted at people like us. I mean, what's happening with you? What's going on? You know, how the Democratic Party's last two administrations have been targeting whistleblowers. Joe Biden isn't freeing Julian Assange. His pardoning of marijuana convictions was a farce. No one, I don't think anyone was convicted under the terms that he pardoned. And there's still many people who are incarcerated who could be pardoned, political prisoners and those who are just imprisoned politically because of the economic situation. So, and racism. So, you know, I think that there's just so much that we can get from your analysis, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking about all of these connections. Do you have any final thoughts before, you know, I'm going to stick around, everyone, for another probably 15, 30 minutes. I have some announcements, but do you have any final words, and also where people can find you?
Okay, great. So my final words are just that, you know, independent media like this show is really critical and is a very powerful, you know, accelerator for the solutions. And, you know, I'm really grateful to be on your show and really grateful for all the great work that you've been doing, Danny, over many years. And I really want to encourage people to support the show and, you know, like it, share it, support it at Patreon. And, you know, this is like a really critical solution right here. So, you know, it's just multiplying this and hanging in, because we're in for a very rocky ride and we know it's coming. So don't be surprised, and, you know, start looking for ways to connect. And people can connect with me at jillstein.net. I am forced to keep my campaign committee open from 2016 while I am working out this lawsuit that I have with the Federal Election Commission right now. So my campaign committee is at jillstein.net. And, you know, it's broadly conceived as a fight for democracy. And, you know, that's what we're doing. You know, that's really what it's all about. So you can connect with me there. And also at Dr. Jill Stein. No, what is it? Dr. Jill Stein, my Twitter.
Oh, right. I think it's, yes, at Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. Jill Stein without the period. Is your Twitter handle. I can put that also in the chat so people know where to find you.
Great.
It was so great talking to you. We'll have to do this again soon. Thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise. Thank you, Danny. Keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, everyone. That was a really great conversation. I have some announcements before we close up here, so do stick around, okay? Keep liking the video, keep sharing it, keep subscribing to the channel if you're new here, and hit that notifications bell. Don't forget that. YouTube tries really hard not to notify you about my streams. So do all that, and of course, right? I think I'm still about $47 away from what I hope will be an ongoing on Patreon, an ongoing, hopefully stable goal for me as I continue to work towards sustainability. So you can subscribe there on Patreon, and of course, you can also become a member here on YouTube. That's another option as well. So I have a few announcements. Number one, this Saturday, it'll be a morning show, but please do save the date. I'm going to have Brian Berletic from the New Atlas on again. Once again, I always enjoy having him on. This will be his third appearance, Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern time. So save the date. That will be my next guest. After him, though, that may be the last guest for a while, depending on how things transpire, because I am actually going on vacation from November 5th, and I won't be streaming again. I will be clipping. I will be back. I'm going to be spending like a whole day clipping videos, getting them together for pre-posting. But so this channel will be active for those who don't have time to kind of backtrack on the streams or replay the streams. I'm going to be clipping videos. And so I won't be back until the week of the probably the 20th, probably the week of the 20th, 21st, Thanksgiving week. I might have a special Thanksgiving. I might try to find someone for a special Thanksgiving stream because I am my wife works that day. So she's going to be getting paid that time and a half, I think, which would be nice. But yeah, those are the announcements. Okay. I have a lot of interesting stuff coming, but the first thing is Brian Berletic here on Saturday. I'm going to be getting that prepared. Okay. Yeah, so that was a great stream. Okay. Great conversation with Dr. Jill Stein, someone who I admire a lot just because it's hard. The work that she's put in with the Green Party and then just overall in her activism, receiving those attacks. We all know what those are like at this point, whether in smaller forms like social media repression or in bigger forms like the demonetization, the algorithm suppression. But then this gets into when it becomes legal and the state becomes involved, that's all very, very challenging. And so, it's great to have her on and to get her voice on these issues because she's rock solid when it comes to alternatives to the Democratic Party. So Luna asks, what time? Welcome, Luna, new member. Thanks so much for becoming a member, which you can do here. You can just go to YouTube and become a member of this channel, $5 a month. What time? Brian Berletic, 11 a.m. Eastern. What is that? 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. China time, Beijing. So, and I think that would be 4 p.m. British time. So yeah, I'll be working on some more things. And yeah, we have some good stuff coming up, and then the vacation, you'll just see clips coming on here, no streams for at least a couple of weeks. So sorry about that, but I do need to take that break. So thanks so much for coming, everyone. I do want to I want to show you something. One last story, okay? A brief one. So I am not, we have Jill Stein brought up the repression. We have a situation, okay? And the situation is that this new Cold War, this new McCarthyism does cloud the facts of the situation. It makes Americans believe that China and Russia are the problem rather than the oligarchs and the capitalists that are actually causing all of this destruction to the planet, to the economy, to that the rising rates of exploitation, the violent repression, the racism, all of it. Russia and China are blamed for it. And that helps both fuel the geopolitical crises, the militarism, and it also helps fuel the domestic crises because now people's attention are diverted onto a quote unquote other, a so-called enemy, a so-called adversary. So I want to go over an article that I just recently wrote. It was published October 11th. I just found out. Global Times publishes quite a lot. And so I'm not, I don't hide the fact that I had to contribute to Chinese media, right? So we've seen this campaign of repression against people who participate in media. For example, Russia, state media, we call it public media, government sponsored media, funded media, RT, CGTN, all of these are more complex than just quote unquote state media. But for the lack of better terms, let's just say Chinese state media, Chinese media. I do contribute to it. I write opinion pieces for CGTN at times. And I also have been doing more work with the Global Times, which some say is a so-called tabloid of the Communist Party of China. But the Global Times, it is widely read. It is something that gives a pretty accurate picture of what both the Communist Party of China, the Chinese government, as well as what people are thinking in China. And they do a lot of monitoring and reviewing netizens and Chinese social media as well. So the Global Times is actually, in Chinese media is actually quite informative, and we should all be at the very least reading it. But I've been doing a bit more articles for them, and I wanted to share with you something I found very interesting. So while corporate media shuts people like myself out, like Lee Camp out, like others who do journalism work, independent journalism and analysis, while we're shut out, right? We can't get jobs at MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, on and on and on. We can't get jobs with these corporations. They don't want us, nor would we want to, in this era. I don't think I would feel comfortable writing for the New York Times, given all of the sacrifices and all of the ways in which I would have to stump and essentially promote State Department talking points, in any kind of politics that benefits corporations and capitalists at the expense of people. That's the sacrifice you make when you do work with those corporate media outlets. But nonetheless, we're shut out. That's the real point. Regardless of whether we want to or not, we know that unless we change the way we view the world, we start lying on behalf of empire rather than telling the truth about it. That's the sacrifice you have to make. And so it's not really a choice. We're forced out. So I wanted to talk about how I wanted to share this article with you, not just because I think it's a good history lesson, a reminder about the CIA, but also the fact that the Global Times asked me for this article. I didn't come up with this out of my own head. They said, hey, do you want to write a short article on why the CIA should be abolished? Can you imagine? Now, can you imagine? Here's the article. Can you imagine the corporate media asking for such a thing from someone like myself or anybody, really? I don't think so. So the next time somebody tells you that China is some kind of propaganda or whatever, Chinese media is propaganda, well, I want you to remember that institutions like the Global Times are asking journalists like myself to write articles such as this, to write articles about why the CIA should be abolished. And so that's what I want to quickly share with you before I head out here. So I wrote, and it was published October 10th, I should have said, October 10th. The CIA has given the human race many reasons to desire its abolition. And so I'm going to talk, so this talks about why abolish the CIA is something we should be taking up. And I say that U.S. intelligence agencies are largely held in esteem by U.S. media and some American people, despite their long history of serving the interests of elites at the expense of humanity. The U.S. has 17 intelligence agencies of varying acronyms, which are designated to conduct the affairs of the state in secrecy. No other U.S. intelligence agency is more recognized globally than the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. The CIA was established soon after the conclusion of World War II and turned 75 this year. The U.S. was at that point the world's biggest economy and military power, and the CIA's covert operations were tasked with helping the U.S. maintain world superpower status amid the growth of socialist alternatives such as the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. So the CIA was founded officially 75 years ago, 1947, and its mission was covert operations globally to wage the Cold War. What was a newer Cold War back then, but it was all about the Cold War. It was all about the Soviet Union. It was all about repressing socialism. The CIA has given the human race many reasons to desire abolition or its abolition. CIA operations across the world have sown chaos and destabilized entire regions. According to foreign policy critic and author William Blum, the CIA participated in the attempted overthrow of more than 40 governments around the world over the course of 5 decades. Some of the most well-known examples include helping facilitate the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz, a progressive and democratically elected leader in Guatemala, Mohamed Mossadegh in Iran, after he, in 1953, attempted to nationalize Iran's oil, BP oil, actually, at that time. Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when Patrice Lumumba declared neutrality, but said he would have a relationship with the Soviet Union, and also said that Congo's rich resources were the Congos, and that the DRC would basically operate its vast mineral resources for its own benefit first. And Salvador Allende in Chile for a similar situation. Salvador Allende was a socialist. He was nominated, but the CIA, September 11, 1973, sponsored a coup, helped facilitate a coup, which violently killed him, and also destabilized that government, put in Pinochet, and you know the rest. So the CIA's history is marked by a broad scope of powers and a lack of transparency. In 1975, the U.S. Congress held hearings, the Church Committee hearings, that detailed a number of CIA abuses, including Operation Mockingbird, where the agency recruited, organized, and embedded itself in major media organizations to spread misinformation. The CIA has also spearheaded the Board of Broadcasting Governors, now rebranded as the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which established entire media organizations such as Radio Free Asia to undermine communist-led governments around the world. In 1951, the CIA attempted to broadcast Radio Free Asia in China by airlifting radio devices on balloons from the island of Taiwan, but abandoned the plan when the receivers were blown back by the wind. So that's the real roots of Radio Free Asia, the one you see now. The U.S. Agency for Global Media has basically said it's no longer CIA funded. It's funded by Congress. But nonetheless, the initial story is hilarious. Radio Free Asia was founded, and you can find the archived New York Times article online. But the Radio Free Asia started in 1951, and most Chinese households didn't have radio receivers. Only a certain few wealthy landed aristocrats, you could say, semi-feudal elites had that kind of technology. Very rare, though, and it was concentrated mainly in the cities. And at that time, there weren't many people in the cities. So it was mainly countryside, mainly rural. So the CIA thought it could blow people from Taiwan, Formosa at that time, radio receivers to help give them the connection from the city centers. And they all got blown away by the wind, and they couldn't do it. So it was a really pathetic attempt, and I think it's just a really funny story. So, and just so how far the intelligence apparatus will go to undermine the Chinese Revolution. The CIA is no less dangerous now as it was then. Many of the CIA's operations have directly informed massive escalations in U.S. wars and human rights abuses. Operation Cyclone, for example, funded armed groups in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union, with this policy creating a template for U.S. foreign policy establishment forces to use in its ongoing campaign of arming and supporting regime change forces in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So the Mujahideen was the main force that benefited from Operation Cyclone by the CIA. And of course, we see the fruits of that still in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, and elsewhere, where the U.S. continues to fund proxy forces for the same purposes, to undermine Russia, undermine China, undermine any sovereign country. The wanton torture of anti-colonial forces in Vietnam under the Phoenix program helped inform the torture campaign that the CIA employed during the War on Terror. The CIA and the rest of the U.S. intelligence community has led the way in fear-mongering about China as part of the U.S.'s military strategy of quote-unquote strategic competition, outlined by Joe Biden's administration. So on October 7, 2021, so a year ago, CIA Director William Burns called China the quote-unquote most important geopolitical threat we face in the 21st century and announced that the mission centers would be established to focus more on China. In 2020, Chinese security firm Qihu 360 discovered a massive CIA hacking campaign that targeted China's aviation, technology, and energy sectors. Last month, China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center found that the NSA hacked into the servers of Northwestern Polytechnic University in an attempt to steal the personal data of teachers and students. The CIA and other U.S. intelligence agencies have spread Cold War-like propaganda while carrying out the very actions they accuse of China. This is exactly what we were talking about with Jill Stein, right? They accused Jill Stein of being a Russian asset. They accused Jill Stein of working with Putin and working for Putin. And then they say that all of this is to undermine U.S. elections, this Russiagate conspiracy. Well, then you find out that the intelligence apparatus and these private contractors, right, they're doing this exact thing and blaming it on Russia and China. They're actually going after the election system, causing instability. It's an operations on its own electoral system. Well, China, it's not often talked about, but China has been the target of intelligence operations. Now, one thing that China has an advantage, right, is that China has a highly developed high-tech sector, information technology sector. It also has robust domestic industries, right, that are not controlled by foreign capital. So it has certain advantages, and it also has a strong communist party that's very popular, and also a strong state-owned economic sector. All of those things gives it advantages and allows for it to remain sovereign and allows for it to protect itself from the CIA. It's not really talked about that much, but that's a big reason for the Great Firewall. While it's not always well received, and while perhaps China's censors can be very, how should I say, they can extend pretty far in some instances. Maybe things are overreactions at times. Mistakes can be made. Errors can be made. But at the same time, the Great Firewall has been very effective in preventing what has happened to us, right? Where you have Meta, what used to be Facebook, where you have all these big corporations stealing data, surveilling us, sending our information to the government, to intelligence agencies. That doesn't exist in China. The U.S. intelligence has complained many times they can't get into China, and that's why William Burns, the CIA director, made this declaration and said we need to focus more. But these mission centers are not going to be located in China. They're going to be located around China with partners in order to try to come up with some kind of strategy to spy on China. That's how pathetic the U.S. is right now in its new Cold War. But that just shows that the CIA, right, is just incredibly dangerous. It is seeking to provoke war with China. And it's not often talked about, right? We often hear people like Matt Stoller, right, talk about, oh, China is in league with Wall Street and with the Democrats, and China is, working with U.S. monopolies to undermine the United States. All this nonsense, when the reality is that the U.S. government is seeking a war with China. First, a new Cold War, but as we see with what's happening with Russia, it really is about testing the waters for what an actual war would be like. And that's why you have all these escalations in Taiwan and elsewhere, but it's also why you have the CIA turning its attention to China. The CIA is an extension of a broader deep state, better termed the real state, that drives U.S. domestic and foreign policy. Journalists like Julian Assange and nations such as China, Iran, and Russia are viewed as threats to be silenced by U.S. elites seeking dominance and maximal profit for themselves. Their narrow interests thrive in conditions of instability and war, and the CIA is funded with an unknown amount of U.S. dollars to help facilitate them. An end to the CIA would thus be a welcome development for the cause of peace, now and in the future. So, I mean, I'm just going to put this out there. I mean, do you think that the U.S. corporate media would allow that on their channels? I don't think so. I don't think they would. And I think that was a very, that's an opinion piece. It's an analysis. I think it's a decent one. I think it's one that is well organized, and I don't hype up my own writing, but I consider myself a quality writer. I don't write big long pieces anymore because of my responsibilities to this media now and other things, but nonetheless, you won't get that analysis in the corporate media, and you won't get anyone like myself, Ben Norton, anyone else who does journalism work independently from a left perspective, a socialist perspective, an anti-imperialist perspective on there. No, we're likely to get repressed more so than we are to be embraced or to even have any opportunity to be there. So that's why it's so important to support independent media. I mean, that's really the crux of the message here, is that the Global Times will publish people like myself. But we need to create alternatives right here in the United States. Just like we need to exit the Democratic Party, we also need to be creating alternatives to the Democratic Party politically, organizationally, and we need media that is an alternative to Democratic Party establishment politics, to all establishment politics, to the entire ruling class superstructure. We need to be creating that, but we are using the master's tools. So that means the master's tools, whenever they see fit, are going to reorganize them and reshape them to try to crush us. So that's why we ask for support. That's why I ask for support for this channel. Appreciate all the support you've been able to give. Please do, of course, subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. Please do also become a member of this channel if you are able. So that is yeah. So let me just thank those who gave super chats. All right. Please do continue to like the video. Let's see how we did tonight with likes. Oh, we got 500 likes. I think we peaked at like 440 440 viewers. So yeah, decent. Show out for Brian Berletic on Saturday. I'm going to get that ready over the next day or so. Send the information to him. Thank you, JM, for being a member and also for your generous support. Thank you for the super sticker. Let's see. We have Hope and Division. Nice. Thanks for the super chat. You said, I saw a billboard for Shen Yun, China Before Communism. Have you heard of this? Yes, I have. I can tell you about Shen Yun. Shen Yun, China Before Communism, is a stealth project or not so stealth project, by Falun Gong, which is a far-right fascistic cult, religious cult, some call it. It was based in China, but China has banned it. China does not allow Falun Gong to practice. And the reason why it doesn't allow it to practice is because Falun Gong is actually connected to the United States in so many ways. There's a lot of, you could call it dark money support. It forwards a message that China is like this organ harvesting country. It's really based on conspiracy theories. A lot of them threw their weight with Donald Trump. You might have seen the I forget her name now. Is it her last name is Zhang. You might have seen her in Wuhan, right, trying to say that she was protesting and repressed. There are a lot of the Epic Times. All of this is Falun Gong connected. There was a time during the Bush administration where they allowed Falun Gong to interrupt Hu Jintao. Was that 2004, 6? One of those years. At a press conference when Hu Jintao, the president of China at the time, was visiting. There's a lot of suspicions that the CIA supports Falun Gong. They're a psychological operation. You'll see them sometimes out in various cities across the country, mainly New York City. There's some presence of Falun Gong. And that's what Shen Yun is. It's a play. It's funded by wealthy people. It's kind of dark money because they try to keep it secret. But it's really like wealthy anti-China forces in the U.S. government, the CIA, funding this. And China Before Communism. I mean, this is how disgusting the establishment is. This is how disgusting anti-communism is. Because China before the Socialist Revolution was one of the poorest countries in the world. People were dying of preventable diseases. Extreme poverty was, if it's 0% now, it was well over 50% in 1949. You had widespread malaria, widespread addiction to opium. You had the repression of women, foot binding, right? Really reactionary practices in that way. People, life expectancy was somewhere between 35 and 40, right? So a really low life expectancy. So China before communism or before the Socialist Revolution in 1949 was not a great place for most people, right? For most Chinese people. However, this is the narrative they want to promote. They want to promote a regime change, an anti-communist narrative, that everything was good before then. And really what they mean, it was good for the rich. It was good for the landed aristocracy. It was good for those that the United States wanted to support after 1945, or even during the early parts of the Chiang Kai-shek KMT rule. But really what they are saying is that the Western-led destabilization of China during the Opium Wars was preferable, right? It's a preferable condition. Semi-colonialism, semi-feudalism is preferable, and you should celebrate that. So yeah, I've heard of it, and thanks for the super chat. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to try to see if there's any more super chats. I think there were a few others who I wish they just all went to one place. That'd be nice. Here is, I'm not going to try to pronounce that name. I don't think that is a language that I speak. Thank you. She did hold it down. I don't know about nervous though, but you know, thank you again, JM. Let's see. Here you are again. Yes, Jill meant Nikita Khrushchev. That was a very, you know, we all make errors, but Khrushchev was at the helm when the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening. And unfortunately, you have some people trying to restart that conversation as if the Soviet Union was to blame for that, which is really unfortunate because we need real comparisons, and I've talked about that here. Again, thank you again to the person. I'm not going to say, I'll just say Ro. Thanks, Ro, for your generous super chats. Really appreciate it. Let's see if there's any more. I think there was at least a couple more, at least one. Again, Ro, you've been very generous today. Oh, I see one that just came in. So I'm going to try to close this up soon. Thank you, Karina. Hey, how's it going, comrade? Thank you for that beautiful Che Guevara quote. Let every action be a battle cry against imperialism and call for the unity of the peoples against the great enemy of the human race, the United States. Thank you so much, Karina. Good to see you here. Dustin, I'd like to hear your thoughts on ballot initiatives. What besides signatures are needed? I think here in Illinois, we haven't had a successful one since 1980. This isn't my specialty. It may be worth emailing Jill Stein about it, or going to her website and trying to contact her. But ballot initiatives, yeah, I'm not an election specialist. People like Fiorella do a lot of good stuff on that. But yeah, no, that could be researched, but I wish I had a better answer for you. But I appreciate, Dustin, your generosity. I'm going to get to the last super chat that was just submitted in a second, but I know there was one more I would like to say. All right, everyone. All right. Maybe not. Oh, here we go. Okay, so Kat, appreciate it. That's really generous super sticker. Then we have Luna. Okay, and then one more. Oh, here we go. Thank you, Alice. Appreciate your support. So yeah, some good super chats today. It's always hit or miss with the super chats. Some I feel like it depends on the audience. Depends on the, you know, sometimes there are audiences that are more like super chat engage in that, and then other times I feel like, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting pattern I noticed. But thanks so much for all your support. Super chats are very much appreciated. So here we go from Grant Scarborough. Is one of the reasons for China strictly limiting game time for minors because China fears gaming addiction among minors will fuel another century of humiliation? Also, keep up the great work. This is a great question. Yes. So, gaming addiction. I just met with a client, a new client. I'm a therapist too. And he immediately talked about his gaming addiction. I have many friends who talk about gaming addiction. Gaming addiction is very real in the United States. It's scary. I remember growing up, I was not a gamer, but my friends, some of them were. And they probably fell just short of addiction because none of them I knew. At least none of them that I was friends, the people I was friends with. I definitely knew people who were. I just wasn't friends with them growing up. But it's a serious problem. It's only gotten worse and worse and worse. I'm sure COVID-19 just, through the roof with all of that quarantine time. But so China, yes, recently, that happened. So in the push for common prosperity, there's been a lot of reforms. And one of the reforms was curtailing the amount of time that young people, minors, people under the age of 18, can play video games, right? And some people might see this, oh, it's so authoritarian. How can you tell a child when or not? That should be with the family and the parents. Well, actually, one of the reasons why this reform happened is because families were at a loss. So gaming addiction, just like any other addiction, is really hard to address just within the family, just within your interpersonal relationships. It just is. It tends to erode them. It tends to destroy them, but not just the relational piece, but the mental health piece. There's a big push in China right now to better acknowledge mental health conditions, addictions, to put more resources into that. And so this is one way to do that is through prevention and through recognizing that the first step is to try to take what can be done now, mobilize fast, and try to put in place an infrastructure where there is an ability to curtail this activity. Because it's not saying you can't play video games, but that video games, a lot of them are designed to create an addictive response in our brain, and then that can really harm not just our emotional world and our inner world, but it can also harm our ability to, it can cause depression, it can cause all sorts of things that then hinder our ability to, for example, complete schooling, our education, to be able to develop social awareness and and other things. So yeah, I don't know if they feel like gaming addiction is going to fuel a century of humiliation. I don't think they see it as that big of a problem, but they see it as a component of possible larger problems that can come from unmitigated, unregulated video game industries, right? This is what this is if you have video games just unregulated, these big companies doing whatever they want to our children, then they're going to super exploit them for money. And so this is part of the whole balancing the reform and opening up with common prosperity. Now, common prosperity is now being more emphasized because China's development status is much higher. It's much wealthier than it was ever before. So yeah, I think this is a big push to now implement more protections for people and for families. A lot of this, this was part of all educational reforms, reductions in homework, right? The basically the elimination, the abolition of a lot of forms of private tutoring and education, and then regulation of whatever was allowed to remain, right? Strict regulations around that. It was all part of these reforms, and it's all about protecting families, protecting children, and acknowledging that gaming addiction is a real problem, and that yes, it can have big problems for the society at large. It can have big problems for the individuals who are engaged in it, and so and who are suffering from it. And so, I think it's a good thing, and that more people need to pay attention to stuff like this, because this whole endless austerity model, this neoliberal model of capitalism by the United States, it ignores these problems. And these problems are an impediment to our movements too. Gaming is such a toxic place. Look at where all of these toxic streamers, Vosh, a lot of the worst elements I feel like have come out of this. The whole Twitch corporation, right? A lot of the biggest streamers on Twitch come out of gaming, and they're all the toxicity, the lack of social awareness, the isolation, right? The alienation for young people. I mean, that's a serious problem. That's a serious, serious problem, and it's one that needs to be addressed. And so we should be looking at things like this. It's so funny because there are some people who really want, right, the nationalization of social media, who want big tech corporations to be accountable and even be nationalized. And China's kind of doing that. And so it's so interesting, right? Because it's hard to be like, oh, well, China is an example. Well, China is an example because China is one of the few places that is doing this. And it's doing so because it is moving towards socialist modernization, which was announced during the CPC National Congress this year, the 20th National Congress. Socialist modernization meaning that the entirety of China is moving into a modern mode of development, but it's going to happen on socialist terms. It's going to happen with attention to people's well-being, standard of living, and it's going to be directed by their needs and not so much profit. That's why you have China not so much saying we're going to grow 10% per year, right? No, they're saying, well, the economic situation isn't great, and we also need high quality development. So this is all part of the entire trajectory, right? The very flexible trajectory of the Chinese Revolution. And so while, yes, not a century of humiliation, I don't think they're worried about, but they are worried about the consequences and the bigger picture reflection of what gaming addiction really portends for their ongoing development. So thank you for that super chat. Really appreciate it. So thank you to all the members of this channel. I think with today we have 14 YouTube members. Thank you to all my subscribers on Patreon. I believe I have about 511, probably a little under that. Thanks to all my subscribers on Substack. I believe I have about 50, 51. And thanks to all those who support on PayPal or wherever else. Thanks to all of you for making this work very much possible. I spend a lot more time on this than I ever was able to before. I in the past, I had to work full time. Now I'm able to do part-time work and do this essentially on a part-time, full-time basis. And that has allowed this channel to grow. That has allowed me to transition more into like a hybrid writing analysis as well as a video commentary role. And I really appreciate all of you. So much salute. Thank you so much. We're heading to the holiday season. And we're heading into hard times. With that said, that means, and I've noticed this, that means more and more people are going to have to sign off and say, I can't support you in that way. And I totally understand. For those who can, though, please do, help me reach this $47 per month goal. I think it is patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. It goes a long way. And we have some really good stuff coming on this channel. And, this work doesn't end for me. And I, I would say my politics change as situations and conditions change, but you always know the core principles here are going to be the same: socialism, anti-imperialism, and no matter who I engage with, that's the perspective I bring, and that's the one that I'm going to maintain, and that's what I'm going to remain focused on, no matter what, no matter what gets thrown. So appreciate all of your help, all of your support, and all that you've been able to give. And please do know that I am very much appreciative. With that said, though, I am going to leave tonight. This is the end of the stream for today. And I'll be back on I might be back before Saturday. I could be on Friday night. But it's the most likely. No, actually, you'll see me live Saturday morning. All right. Take good care. Good evening from here out in the United States, and good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. If you're elsewhere, Take care and goodbye.